Hello and welcome to yet another Let Me Show You My Rack video. Last time I showed you my wooden Eurorack system with Bastel Instruments and Error Instruments modules. And now I'll show you my steel Eurorack system, consisting almost exclusively of Klangbau Köln modules. Klangbau Köln is a small manufacturer here in Cologne, Germany, and you've probably seen some of his modules, especially the Hordijk Benjolin version, the Twin Peak filter, or even the most popular module of his, the Klangbau Tube VCA, which runs on a small Russian mini tube, giving your sound lots of grit. But let's start, like in the other videos as well, at the top left corner of the rack and then move through the rows. The first module in the first row is the Klangbau CV-Prozessor. It's a joystick module with a little knob joystick like you would find on a PlayStation controller. You can click it to receive a gate signal at the gate output, and you can of course use it to invert or attenuate incoming CV signals, for which you have an X and Y input, so you can use both axes at the same time. If no input signals are plugged in there, the module just gives you a voltage output according to the X and Y position of the joystick. Next to the joystick module is the Klangbau Köln version of Rob Hordijk's Benjolin, which was in production a while ago. It's a very big module, but if you know the Benjolin already, you know that it's also an instrument in itself. So you can do a lot of stuff with it and it has a really cool sound, coming with 2 oscillators and a filter. If you want to learn more about the Benjolin, which you really should, then check out the video description for a link to a tutorial video which I posted. Next up, there's an early version of the Klangbau Wavefolder, which is, like the name suggests, a wavefolder which lets you create new waves out of usually sine waves. The cool thing here is that it has a built-in VCA, which is very important for wavefolding, and it has 2 outputs. One is the clean output of the VCA and the other output is the wavefolded output. So for example, when you want to do deep bass lines, you can send a sine wave in there, have some cool wavefolded overtones, and then use the original deep sine wave to get some more bass in there. Now, as I said, this is an early version of the wavefolder. The one you can buy now has a little different features, but it's still the same concept. Up next, there is the Klangbau envelope generator, which is an ADSR envelope which can also loop itself. And what I like about it is that it will always complete the attack stage. So usually with ADSR envelopes, you have the attack stage cut off very quickly if you have very short gates that go in there. But this one always will finish the attack stage, giving you a different kind of sound when using it to modulate certain parameters. The hole next to the envelope generator is reserved for the Klangbau P sequencer, which is just being released. It's based on the DIY circuit of the same name, and you'll find a link to that in the video description as well. The nice thing about the sequencer is that it's very small, and it can record 2 CV sequences at the same time and then play them back in a loop. But it can also change the way it plays them back through different modes, and it can also generate gates and triggers. So it's really nice to record a random CV sequence like coming from the Benjolin and then loop that to create cool melodies. The last Klangbau module in this row is the CV-controlled trigger delay, which is, as the name suggests, a simple trigger delay that you can also control with control voltages. So if the control voltage is high, the delay of the incoming trigger will be longer, and if it's lower, then it's shorter. And this is a really simple module, but together with some other modules that generate triggers or gates, it can be really fun to create self-evolving rhythms and patterns. The last module in the first row is a Doepfer A138 mixer, because Klangbau doesn't produce mixers right now. So I'm using that to mix my audio signals together. Alright, let's look at the second row. On the left I have an intellijel unity mixer, which I also use for mixing audio signals together, and it's a very thin module which fits in there nicely. Next to that I have an early version of the Hordijk Twin Peak filter made by Klangbau Köln, which is still available, and that's a really cool filter which I also did a short tutorial video for, which you can find in the video description. The fun thing about the Twin Peak filter is that it can create really nice woody or even liquid kind of percussive sounds when you ping the filter. And again, check out the tutorial video in the description, because yeah, it's a really special module and I hardly use it as a regular filter at all. It's usually a really nice effect generator, I think. Next to the Twin Peak filter, there's the Klangbau digital wavetable oscillator, which has two banks of wavetables labeled sub-oscillator and main oscillator. And you can, of course, cycle through those wavetables using control voltages. And the first main oscillator that will blend between the wavetables, and the second oscillator, the sub-oscillator, will switch between them hard. So you get different sounds with them when cycling through the wavetables. There's also an FM input, of course a volt per octave input, and you also have a portamento and a bit crusher on there, because it's all digital, and this was apparently easy to do on this module. Since I bought the module, there have been updates to it, so if you buy it now, it will look a little different maybe. Coming up next, there is the big version of the Klangbau XR-VCO, an analog voltage controlled oscillator. And yeah, there's a smaller version of that as well with a little less features. But I've got the big one here with a sync input with linear and exponential FM. It has a sine and triangle output as well as a square wave output with pulse width modulation, and also built-in wave shaper, which you control via control voltages. So that's a really feature-packed VCO that I think sounds really good as well. Next to that, there's the state variable voltage controlled filter by Klangbau. It's generally a rather clean filter, but it also has a nice normalization feature where it will send the audio input to the filter cutoff frequency, and then you can get really rough sounds out of it as well, because the audio will modulate this filter itself. There's also the possibility to modulate the resonance via control voltage, which is also quite special, and you don't have that on many filters. Next in line, there's the Klangbau Köln version of Tom Whitwell's radio music. This one uses a big SD card, because Klangbau said we all have those lying around, so why not use them for something like this? And this is also why I bought it, and it's a little wider, it has a little more space for patching and for fine-tuning. So yeah, if you know the radio music, this will do exactly what the original does. If you don't know it, it's a sample player where you can use control voltages to switch between samples and also switch the starting time of the sample. To the right of the radio music, we have probably the most popular module of Klangbau Köln. It's the so-called Röhren VCA, a tube VCA, using a Russian mini tube for its distortion. There are two audio inputs that can also overdrive the tubes. There are three modes that you can switch between, giving the tube distortion a different characteristic, and of course there is CV control over the gain. Next to the tube VCA, there's the Logistische Gleichung, the logistic function module. And this has actually been a longer project of Klangbau, which you can read up on the website, and he's currently trying to create this function in a completely analog way. The module I have here is based on a digital chip, and what it does is it receives a trigger, and then it gives you a stepped CV output, but not completely chaotic, but following this logistic function. So this is not just nice as a not so random CV sequencer, but also for generating interesting rhythms. And the last module in the second row is an early version of the CV-Prozessor, which was the first module I showed you, the joystick one. This one doesn't have this knob, but just a little kind of stick there. And it also doesn't have the gate output yet. Other than that, it's the same thing. Alright, we're almost done. But below my 2 rows of Eurorack modules, I have another panel, which I designed myself with help from Klangbau, giving me some more utilities. Because actually in the back of the case behind it, there is a spring reverb tank, also from Klangbau Köln, which is really cool for, reverb. And because I had some more front panel space there, I designed that utility panel. It's completely passive. And on the left here, we have 4 attenuators with on and off switches, which can also work as a passive mixer. And this is a circuit from the Doepfer DIY page, for which you can also find a link in the video description. To the right of that, there are 4 more passive attenuators. And to the right of that, I have 4 5-input multiples, which I can also switch to 10-input multiples. As you already know, you need multiples a lot. And like this, I don't waste space on a Eurorack module. To the right of that, there are 4 converters going from the mini jacks to the 1/4-inch jacks, which is handy because I sometimes like to use guitar pedals as well. And then on the very right, there are 2 switches, which let me just choose one input going to the output or the other way around, or which can let me just switch signals on and off if I don't use the 2 input or output sockets there. So this panel offers a variety of passive tools, which are just nice to have, and I'm really glad that Klangbau helped me to produce it. After receiving it, building all those parts in there was just a very simple DIY task, for which you don't really need a lot of skill, so I could do that really quickly. I've got a few photos of the build process on my Instagram account, so check that out, it's in the video description as well. Alright, and that's my steel rack. It's a good opposite to the wooden Bastel Instruments rack, not just visually, but also from the concept, because Klangbau is very into experimental music, which you of course see with the Benjolin and the Twin Peak filter, but also with this logistic function module that generates this really cool rhythms and CV patterns. And yeah, there are wavefolders in there and VCOs that can be used in very nice and experimental ways. So it's a completely different way of making music in this rack than with a different rack. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section below. And also, again, check out the video description for links to the Klangbau website and to other resources. So I hope this was interesting to you, and yeah, have a good day, and see you soon in the next video.